have some fun now. And thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Jamie Montgomery. This is Marko Papic. And Marko is going to sit on my right. He thinks I'm probably on the right, but I'm on your right when you look at it. So, Marko, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I'm a big fan of yours and your reading, and we have so much in common. Marko grew up a Yugoslavian family, so his father moved him around from Iraq, Yugoslavia, Jordan, and Switzerland. And then that was the hard way. He got a software upgrade when he went to Canada, got his undergraduate degree at University of British Columbia, where both my parents went. We're comparing notes. Then came to Texas to do his PhD at UT Austin and gone on to an illustrious career, and including some time with the bank credit analysts. And people accuse me of being too happy, so I occasionally read the bank credit analysts just to correct myself. They predicted 10 out of the last 3 recessions, so yeah. They were always very good. But Marko is a wonderful global strategist, macro thinker, and very insightful and thoughtful observer of what's going on in the world. And sometimes it goes counter to what might be the conventional wisdom. But, you know, as an investor, we like to zig when everyone else is zagging, because if you zag when everyone else is zagging, you get the same results as everybody else. So we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some things that might not be controversial, but maybe counter to what maybe a lot of people are thinking. So let's have some fun today, Marko. Thank you for being here.
I always try to have fun. There's no point otherwise.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have you back. You were here last year, and thank you for asking me to do the fireside chat. So I was just talking about my first job out of graduate school at Cambridge, and I was working for the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations, and one of the tasks he gave me, I would do his morning intel and stuff like that. I can't say a hell of a lot more than that, but he asked me to organize the Inter-Service Long-Range Planning Conference. And it was 1983, and I thought, he said, make it interesting, but don't get me in too much trouble, which, you know. So that was my first conference I organized, and Ronald Reagan was President Reagan, and took the Joint Chiefs down to Annapolis and had a all-day session. And in the morning, we had a session invited General Bill Odom in, who was a 3-star, ran NSA, and I'd gone to meet with General Odom, and I asked him, what do you got? And he looked at me like, who the hell is this kid? And he said, I got the collapse of the Soviet Union, and this is how it's going to happen. I thought, that's interesting. Anyone else follow this? He said, yeah, the president does. I said, okay, so we had General Odom there, and he described the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that was really sort of counter. But you have a point of view like that too, right?
So but before we go on, what happened then? Well,
I mean, we had a great session, and then everything got classified, and then they want to shut down that conversation, and then it all happened. And then I got called in the Deputy Secretary of Defense's office, Frank Carlucci. I wasn't sure whether he wanted to make me a spy or what the plan was, but he was leaving to go run a merchant bank, which became Carlyle Group, and so I left and became what I am today. So, yeah.
So basically, they took the idea of the collapse of the Soviet Union
and buried
it. They put it in a box, and like Indiana Jones, right? They put it in one of those crates. And
exactly. Yeah, and it was interesting because he could see what was going on. Demographics is your destiny often. He looked at what was going on in the Balkans, also what was going on with the economy there, and could see through it. And the CIA was missing all these signals. And Bill, he was a Sovietologist, for lack of a word, could see this clearly. And I think people who study Russian history might have a little better perspective. But there are a lot of experts who it wasn't in their best interest to see what was really going on.
And so that's really important. And I don't think it's a conspiracy theory when that happens. I mean,
no, we're not that competent to have conspiracy.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
What happens is basically you grew up somewhere in the U.S., like New Jersey or something, and
you laughed. Yeah.
And then you decide, I'm going to, study Russian. That's really difficult. You get all these skills, you become an expert, and your entire ethos, like everything about you now depends on this war continuing.
Yeah.
And so what I want to talk about here is that you guys are all Sovietologists, more or less, and the Soviet Union is collapsing.
Right.
So that's what I want to talk about today. You've spent a lot of time figuring out the Russian language, You figured out all the different bits and pieces of the Kremlin puzzle. You know, who's sleeping with who are the key people moving up and down. That's what you've spent all your life doing. And now, it's going to collapse. And so what I want to talk about is that that's happening to tech. Like, the good times are over. The decade of tech is gone. It might not go to zero, but it's basically not going to go anywhere else. And the reason for that is not inflation. It's not the 10-year yield, although sure, that matters too. Suddenly money has value, so you don't want to plow it into some 24-year-old hitting the bong and coding. You know? Like, now you can get it. Like, I can get 5.5% from a CD. But, like, let's leave that aside, because that's the usual reason why tech is going to zero. And I don't want to spend time on that. It's math. I don't even understand that. I want to talk about the geopolitical and historical reason why we're going to move away from SaaS businesses, why we don't need another SaaS business.
Why the world does not need another SaaS company.
Yeah.
By Marko Papic. Here we go.
So here's the thing.
Roll, action.
Right.
Global audience throughout the world are listening, Marko.
So I want to start off with Francis Fukuyama's famous essay, which everybody knows, and then he turned it into a book, The End of History, and very importantly, And the Last Man. That was the second part of that title. The End of History he took from Hegel. The Last Man he took from Nietzsche. Now, Fukuyama's been kind of, you know, like he failed, right? It's not the end of history. We've got war in Ukraine, we have China, US, we have geopolitical tensions again. So it's seen as a wrong forecast. But look, he wrote that forecast in the early 90s, and it was right for like 20 years. It was the end of history. Western liberal democracy won. America was in charge. You know, that was it. Now, what does that have to do with this room? Well, it has to do with the fact that the government stepped back. It stopped, you know, nurturing, helping to guide with a very visible hand where technological progress goes. That was left to the last man. And almost exclusively men, by the way. The women in this room know what I'm talking about. Tech bros, right? So we call it bros for a reason. So basically, trillions of dollars went to the Silicon Valley in pursuit of frivolous technological innovation. Yes, I know I've just insulted 90% of you, I'm sorry. You know, but after Microsoft Excel and the internet, like, do we really need all this crap? Like, we can't measure productivity gains. Oh no, Marko, it's hard to measure. Okay, sure, it was hard to measure indoor plumbing and penicillin. Eventually it showed up in TFP data. So what we did when the last man took over innovation, the last man in pursuit of innovation plowed trillions of dollars into dating apps and food delivery apps. By the way, the two come together. The date ends at 3 a.m. You can get a cheeseburger delivered to your door. It's like perfect. We plowed trillions of dollars in, as HBO Silicon Valley like makes fun of this idea, changing the world by delivering faster algorithms for something ridiculous. We did not change the way we grow food. We did not change the way we transport ourselves. We did not change the way we fight wars. Don't get excited about Ukraine war. HIMARS and javelins were invented in the 80s and 90s, by the way, by the folks that Jamie talked about before I was born. So we did not change anything that has a meaningful impact on our actual life. We did not get smarter. We actually, white men in America die earlier now. Our health expectancy has gone down.
Quentin's dying over here.
You know, like, I mean, we're dumber. IQs are not getting higher.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that we might have changed is suicide rates amongst teenagers. Oh, I know, yeah. This is going to be a long day. You know, you guys, this is, you know, if you have a weak stomach, you should leave. So my point about this is that that is the innovation pursued by the last man. And by the way, the tip of the iceberg, obviously, is crypto and NFTs. You know, like, oh, let's go into that, because that's going to change our life. How? Decentralizing finance? We spent 2,000 years centralizing finance. Now we're going to decentralize it. My point about this is all ending. And it's not because the 10-year or inflation are higher, because, yes, sure, we can talk about that too. But it's ending because the government is now saying, like, hold my beer. I'm back. Like, enough of this stuff. Nonsense. What are you doing? What's your MO? You're going to invent some algorithm that will moderately improve? No. Screw that. We're going to now invest in things that actually matter for humanity. Why? because we got to kill those guys over there, like fundamentally speaking. So if you read Luddites like Robert Gordon and his famous book, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, he keeps referring to this period of 1870 to 1970. He keeps talking about this. This is when everything was invented that matters, at least in his mind, because he's looking at productivity growth data. What happened in 1870?
Railroads.
Right, railroads. But in particular, what happened in 1870 is the British hegemony started to weaken. Why? Is it because they did something stupid? No. They created global peace and order, hegemony, that allowed a lot of countries to start rising in power. So Japan figured it out. Admiral Perry shows up. The Japanese start industrializing. The Russians lost the first Crimean War, by the way. They did reforms, emancipated the serfs, started industrializing. Americans had their own civil war, started industrializing, nation building. And then finally, the most important geopolitical event in the 19th and probably 20th century was what? Was the unification of Germany in 1871. And this multipolar geopolitical context created competition between nation states at a very high level. And that's when the government said, hold my beer, I'm going to invest in railroads. I'm going to invest in transportation, communication, health, educating people, teaching them how to read so that they can also be part of a military. All that stuff happened from 1870, 1920, and it's when we discovered almost everything that's meaningful. And I think that we're at the beginning of that, surge of technological innovation again. So unlike BCA Research and your experience with them, I'm actually not bearish at all. I think the world is not ending. The world is just beginning. It just might be ending for you if you've plowed all of your efforts into SaaS businesses.
There you go. A number of years ago, we thought the world doesn't really need another SaaS business, and I finally found someone who agreed with me.
Well, it's been wrong for a couple of years, obviously.
Yeah. No, but it was more about you need intelligence and automation and AI. Just another software business to kind of run something on. It's like, you go into a company that have 60, 80, 100 apps, and you're like, how many of them are actually used, And it really was kind of hard to quantify. So we've always been about, let's do something meaningful, let's have intelligence in it. But I think what Marko is going a little bit further. It's basically saying this next decade or several decades is really an era of the kinetic rather than the virtual.
Computational, yeah.
Computational. Now, computational science combined with biology will create new industries, as synthetic biology. Computational science with aeronautics will create, space industry. I mean, there will be quite a few kinetics with that built into it. But it's really an era, and I guess the question you'd have is, why necessarily is a dollar of earnings in software worth 60x multiple worth a dollar somewhere else is worth 10x? And it's because software, SaaS, has had a compelling narrative, right? And the most important thing as an investor in this country, and people come from all over the world to learn this lesson, is to have a compelling narrative. And software had a compelling narrative. And that narrative is now about to end, right? Is that your...
Well, I think there are advantages to SaaS companies, obviously.
Yeah, recurring revenue, high margins. Yeah.
Profit margins are obviously, high margins are key. The other one is that you can just pick, as I said, a 24-year-old hitting the bong in a suburb in Palo Alto, give them some money, and boom, you got it. The problem is that the kinetic world requires you to find some 45-year-old engineer, who's been slaving away and who needs some capital to build a factory, to build a prototype. That requires more work from you, from the LPs, from the GPs. So you can't just go to Stanford MBA, cool, what's your story? Uber for flowers. Like Uber for books, Spotify for books. Done, let's go. So those days, I think, are over. And one of the reasons they're over is because while SaaS businesses have high profit margins, the TAM that you were promised might be smaller than you think. That really started in 2013 when China said no to our SaaS businesses. And now emerging markets are saying no to a lot of this stuff because they are inventing their own apps for their own circumstances, for their own cultural and local sort of proclivities. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind as an LP. Don't obsess about profit margins, also think about TAM. And if I invent a better molecule that grows food better, what's my TAM? It's the entire world. So that's I think, the trade-off. The other thing also is that government's return into the field of innovation is empirically proven to have a meaningful impact. You can look at TFP growth in the US. You can lag R&D spending by government by 2 years, and the correlation is pretty good. The second issue is that governments are really bad at picking winners and losers. They're terrible at it. When they start tinkering with sectors, as the US government is doing now with semiconductors, it's probably not going to go anywhere good. But when they create goals, missions, they're actually extremely good at that. And that's something, it's not my view. I don't know how many of you have read The Entrepreneurial State by Professor Mariana Mazzucato. If you haven't, read it. Her argument is, when a government creates a mission, puts backing behind it, we tend to accomplish those missions. The obvious example is the moonshot, right? And obviously an ancillary technological innovation that flowed out of the moonshot is the reason we are beaming this to the rest of the world right now.
Yeah.
But the other example is Operation Warp Speed. I mean, Donald Trump, got laughed at, but let's be clear what he did. He put people who were going to make the vaccine in a room with the regulators, said, what do we need to do? Okay, change the way that we test drugs. Cool. How much money do you need? I'll triple it. Let's go. We got a vaccine in 8 months. That is the proper way for the government to become involved, creating missions. What are the missions we need to do? What do we need? How do we accomplish them? And I think that you're going to see a lot more from that. And it's going to be brought on by the crises that are happening around the world. So I'm, for example, extremely optimistic about Europe.
Okay.
Europe has an energy crisis. They're going to solve it through this kind of mission-oriented innovation.
So this goes quick. Let's talk about, we'll go around the world, all right? China. Your China bull, China bear, how's it going to play out?
So first of all, for people in this room, your portfolio should be whatever Xi Jinping wants to invest in. And that's not my view. I'm recycling that from a very, very famous VC who came to a little retreat I was at, and he said, look, just do what Xi Jinping's doing. So in 2012, he decided to focus on TMT sector. Now, China's focusing on hard technology. They basically decided we don't need TMT sector, we need to be in hard tech, semiconductors, EVs, batteries, energy, food,
lithography, chip manufacturing.
Health, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm relatively bearish about China.
Yeah.
I just don't think it collapses.
Demographics, political system.
It's not the demographics. I actually don't think demographics are destiny.
Okay.
I have a different view than that. I mean, like, the region with the best demographics in 2010 was North Africa, by the way. And guess what? They couldn't employ all those young people, so what did you get? You got Arab Spring.
Yeah.
So demographics can be a double-edged sword. For China, the problem for China is much simpler, much more mundane. Last decade, the US consumer took a break for a decade. So what did China do? They surged credit. They're at the end of their debt supercycle. They're going to have a decade of deleveraging ahead of them.
Yeah.
Combined with the demographic point, I don't think they're the next thing. And I think American policymakers, by the way, are probably obsessing too much about that.
Yeah. Well, we seem like we're slobbering for a war with them, which is not a good idea.
Well, someone's got to buy all those weapons,
Yeah.
and Al-Qaeda's gone, so hey.
Yeah, all right. India.
India, I think India's problem, Danny Roderick, professor at Harvard, already wrote a piece on this. I think it was Danny Roderick, Premature Deindustrialization. India's problem is it's full of people like you. And again, sorry to be insulting all the time, but IT is not going to save India. India cannot just have a bunch of people in Mumbai doing IT. Sorry. You can't jump from low income to service-oriented economy. Industrialization is an important part of development because productivity rates in manufacturing are much higher than services. And what India did is it just decided to focus on IT. Now, Modi is trying to solve that. He's got a lot of interesting ventures to fix it. So I think that he understands what India needs. The problem is that a lot of other countries are eating India's lunch. So there is absolutely no evidence that India is gaining market share globally in exports. Now, I know that you guys are reading newspapers that say, oh, they're going to build iPads in India. Everyone's like, there you go. It's not showing up in macro data. It's not. Vietnam is stealing market share. India isn't. India's trade growth is pure alpha. Sorry, it's pure beta play. It's not an alpha play. So I am concerned about India in the long term. And by the way, the demographic being destiny will be tested in that country.
Yeah.
It's harder to get a job in Indian railways than to get into Harvard, by the way. Like, they have hundreds of thousands of applications for like 100 positions. So if they don't start creating manufacturing jobs, it's a big problem. Not everyone can work in IT.
Right. That's interesting. You're bullish on Europe.
Yes, I am.
And tell us why.
So no one's bullish in Europe, so I'm bullish in Europe because, hey, you know, first of all. Second of all, I'm bullish on Europe because Europe is actually good at all the things that
are going to be important. Manufacturing, technology, energy.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So if this is the cycle, if this is a decade of industrials, materials, and energy, as I think it is, then it's fine that they only have Spotify. You know what I mean? Every time I go to Europe, they're all depressed, right? Oh my God, we only have Spotify. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, don't invest in tech because you missed that boat and you're bad at it. You know, like, it's cool. Like, Japanese the same. You know, I spoke to the Japanese government. They're like, we're investing in tech. I'm like, yeah, it's 2023. I mean, maybe you should have done that 10 years ago.
Marko's got a daughter going to Marymount next year. How are you with your daughter? You tell her this, hey, you know, you're kind of this candid? I always get in trouble when I'm this candid with my kids.
I'm very candid with my kids, yes.
Yeah, don't take that class. You know?
My job is not to be their friend. My job is to be their dad.
Exactly. All right.
My clients don't pay me to make them make them feel good.
Feel good. No.
But look, Europeans are just good at the stuff that I think is going to be meaningful over the next decade. The second thing that they have is they have a crisis.
You know, I was over in London in October, and the dollar was about 20% stronger than it was now, and I was trying to find what company over there did I want to buy in London. I was like National Grid. I mean, it was just France has some good companies. Germany has some good companies. Holland, AMSL, you know.
Yeah,
I was struggling in London. I thought, what do I really want to? I knew the pound was on sale. I was 20% off. So you know, I still couldn't find anything that was compelling.
What you need to buy in London is just Mayfair
Exactly.
townhomes.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
I know.
You know, get yourself a Bentley and then you're good.
Yeah.
No, but look, Europe has companies that I think are going to do well in this.
I was trying to buy some souvenirs, like some shares or something. All right.
Look, 30% of Europe's energy is renewables. 30%. It's double the US.
Yeah.
So they have an energy crisis. They're going to double down on this innovation.
Yeah.
And you'll see innovation come out of that field.
Japan, Korea, that part of the world.
Japan, materials.
Yeah. Great companies, great manufacturing companies.
Like
Korea.
we put together a Japanese green tech index.
Yeah.
And it's all these material companies doing materials. I don't even know what those materials do.
Really?
But, you know, Korea's great. Again, this competition creates diamonds. By the way, you know, like, I'll give you one example of this that I think you'll enjoy. Historical example. Where did Industrial Revolution start? In the United Kingdom. In England. It wasn't UK. Why? Because they ran out of trees.
Yeah.
You know? England, I mean, there's many reasons. I mean, I'm just being glib here because we've got like 20 minutes. But England ran out of trees, and then the Baltic nations would transport trees to them. And then the Danes, being Danes, were always like kind of messing with that route. So the English were like, what do we do? How do we fuel ourselves?
Yeah.
Well, we got this coal, but it's heavy.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's located in certain geographical parts. So they started digging canals, which was really expensive. And then they were like, oh, well, that's going to take too long. Why don't we use coal to burn, create steam, and then move coal with it? What I'm trying to get at is that countries that are winning tend to get fat and lazy. It's crises. It's the meek that win. So I see the cover of The Economist, and it's like, Europe is deindustrializing. I'm like, really? Germans are going to deindustrialize?
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Which part of German history tells you they give up?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, which part of German history tells you that they're going to be cool deindustrializing? It's insane. And so what happened? They built LNG import terminals in like 3 months.
Record time, yeah. All right. Last geography. Love to talk about Australia, but we'll get there on another occasion. Saudi. amazing growth there. MBS has absolutely transformed the country. Emirates is booming, obviously driven by energy and the surpluses there. Comments on what you're seeing in Saudi and that part of the world.
So I think that what's happening in Saudi Arabia hasn't really happened since like the Meiji Restoration in Japan.
Yeah.
And I think our problem is our own stereotypes of the region. So like, as you said, I grew up in the Middle East for part of my childhood, and I think that there is a image that Westerners have of Islam and of the Middle East that is colored by like the last 30 years. But there's thousands of years of history. Islam would not have spread around the world in such a quick amount of time if it wasn't progressive, if it didn't have liberal and emancipatory elements to it. So what's interesting about Saudi Arabia is that the leadership is simply saying to itself, like, we can pick and choose out of 1,000 years of Islamic history, what version of Islam we want. And they've decided to go all in on this emancipatory, liberal, progressive version. And so the socioeconomic changes in Saudi Arabia are much greater than you can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, they are on par with the Meiji Restoration in Japan, when Japan said, you know what, we're done with feudalism. We're going to industrialize in record time. That's what's happening in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's amazing to see what's going on there. Well, Marko, thank you. It's a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's nice to have you here. He'll be around for a little bit. You want to say hello to him, catch up? Yeah, nice to have you as a friend, Marko.
Or punch me in the face.
No. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys.